Let me start by introducing ourselves here. My name is Micheal Sigrist, and this is Liana Conyers. So we both come from Bard, DC, so we're both faculty members at Bard Early College in Washington, DC, one of the newer campuses in the BSEC network. I, before coming here, was a philosopher at one point, and then I healed myself, as our earlier speaker mentioned. And now I am chair of the social sciences department at Bard. And Liana, if you want to introduce yourselves, and then we'll start the talk.
So my name is Liana Conyers, and I'm the Associate Dean of Studies at Bard DC. I'm going into my 10th year with the early colleges. I started off at the campus in New Jersey, and I'm also performing arts faculty. I did not study philosophy. The majority of information that I know is from Foucault and the gaze, specifically the gaze onto Black dancing bodies that I did use in my M.F.A. thesis. So I'm glad that we are here to share our stories.
Yeah, and so we're also going to take to heart, I think, Jacob's opening remarks, where this is a kind of wandering journey, that we're not exactly sure where this is going to go, and we're okay with that. I liked Alan's word, wiggly. That's kind of how I think of this little conversation here. And we're both going to just kind of start it off and try to find ways to connect with each other. We have talked about it a little bit beforehand, but we're also open to the new experience of what's going to come. And then we would like for all of you to join us as well. And hopefully we'll just have a conversation somewhere along the themes of suffering and disease and love and art and beauty. So, Liana, do you want to start with your story? And then I'll try and respond, and then we'll see how it goes and do that way. Okay.
Yes, so I have had the privilege of attending performing arts schools since I was 5 years old, and growing up in a neighborhood where there was lots of violence and economic disparities. The arts have always been a portal for me to express myself when I couldn't do that at home, as well as to heal myself from the things that were occurring in my neighborhood and my household. And I've always thought of suffering in my mind as mental illness or mental health, and how do we address those issues? And we can do that, or at least for me, through artistic expression. And what I experienced in Singapore, I think it was mentioned last night that I had a Fulbright in Singapore. I'm a little bit nervous, everybody. It's interesting, when I perform, I typically have glasses and I take them off as part of the process so that I don't see the audience, but they can see me with this blurred vision. And so I was in Singapore for 6 months doing a Fulbright, and I was doing research on STEM education. It turned out that at my first school, I watched a group of students with a lot of laughter. They were different from everyone else, lots of expression, and I wanted to get as close to them as possible and find out why they gravitated towards each other and had this relationship. And once I entered their portal, it became this entire story about their mental health and how they felt that they were closed off during the pandemic, as well as those things not being addressed within their families and in the school. So they developed their own language, and I was fascinated by it. I won't go into the details of it, but there was one point where I kept hearing them say, "I love you, I 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 love you," as they're holding themselves. And this is like completely the antithesis of what was occurring in the culture. And what I noticed is that those students, through this dialogue, that they were able to really, truly tap into mental health, which is something that's not necessarily addressed in that community. And I would say that I can make the connection with the Black community in the United States and probably across the globe, which is when I have something to express when I was younger about my mental health, it was, well, pray about it. As someone that's not religious, what does that have to do with me or my notion of God? Until later on, I read Conversations with God, and I started to think of life in a different way. So that's my opening, Micheal.
Okay, I love that. Could you give an example maybe of how art and love come together, like, or maybe say a little bit more about why art and love, beauty and love, the experience of love and the experience of beauty seem so natural together. Do you think that's true?
I think it's on a spectrum.
Okay.
Right? And depending on the artist that's entering that work and their stories. I believe in autobiographical art making. And you have this notion of being on one end of the extreme to the other. And there's a notion where there's healing and hiding that can come from the arts and making those connections, or diving as deep as possible that you can into that particular notion of love, wanting to connect with art. One of the things within the Black experience is that it's typically, at least for me, is typically steeped in autobiographical art making. And throughout my journey as a performance artist in the United States, I used my autobiography as a tool where the audience were consumers of that information, whether they had the same experience as me or not. And my work was steeped so much in trauma and making something beautiful out of it, where the audience didn't necessarily know that this was about the death of my father or my community being ripped to pieces. And along the way, I started to really dive into the other end of the spectrum, which is joy. Joy connecting to my heart opening within, a decade. And it's really important for me to bring that into work, especially as a Black artist.
And do you think that so Liana is a really accomplished performer, when you are, I guess, performing, do you feel like you're in a love relationship with the audience? Like, do you feel like you're opening up to them and they're opening up to you? And does it feel like love? What could you say more about that? I would love to hear more about that.
Yes, interesting. So the current piece that I'm working on has a bit of the information from my research in Singapore. And I want us to think about the internet and specifically these apps that people are using now. And I've noticed since the pandemic, there's been more use of Instagram, TikTok, and people are making connections across the globe with these things. Even finding therapy through quotes that are there, or therapists that are going online and using those as tools. So my newest work is based on that sort of healing and hiding through the internet. What are we consuming? How are we doing this, and staying up all night? What's happening with youth in our community? And I work a lot with the audience. So through comedy, as well as developing these relationships. And what happens when I say, excuse me, I'm really nervous right now. Would you come on up here and help me out? Is there a way or can I come and sit near you? And so you're forming connections and making eye contact with someone or bringing them into the experience, which is part of my work.
That's beautiful. I love it. So when we had talked about some of this earlier, we had noticed that we talked about the kind of duality with social media, and you had told your stories about how a lot of the anxieties that our students feel and that your students in Singapore were feeling, a lot of the trauma that they were experiencing also can go back to can go back to social media, and the ways of communicating through social media can really distort and corrupt and harm human relationships. And but then you had also shared how there was real connection kind of made through it as well. And so this duality is something that I think from my own work I had noticed in relationship to love. So I was interested in the way that romantic love kind of came to be such a central part in our lives. I have always been kind of fascinated by the fact that I don't think you see romantic love as such a central part of human lives until fairly recently. And yet we today really kind of obsess over it. It's certainly central in our art. Most stories have a love element in it. And why did that come to be? How did this come to be such a central part of what we tend to aspire to as flourishing in our lives? And it's also a big source of pain. most of the things in our lives that really cause us to suffer and worry and obsess and feel bad about ourselves come through love. And it's almost as if most of the other sources of suffering in life are often filtered through love. So if you fail at your work, oftentimes what makes that failure so profound is you worry how it's going to impact your core relationships, your core love relationships. Will the support be there for you that you need? Will you be rejected for that failure? Those kinds of things. Yeah.
And it's very public.
Very public, yeah.
From the suffering to the most romantic, blissful love that occurs. And we can see that all throughout the internet and in just communities now where there are more voices being heard in those expressions of what happens between the two of us. And it's more of a dialogue that occurs rather than it being something that's more so hidden.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I like that, yeah. One of the things that someone, I think it was Andrew, brought up Schopenhauer earlier, and Schopenhauer has a great analysis of the genius. And Schopenhauer, I think, he might be singularly responsible for this idea that the genius is always going to be a kind of doofus to the rest of the world. And his idea is because the genius is fixated on the idea. And that means the genius is not fixated on the conventional, on things that are needed to have a well-running daily life. So you're going to forget to eat, and you're going to forget to take care of yourself, and you're going to forget to do the dishes, and you're going to also forget to care to your personal relationships. And so people aren't going to like you. And one of the things that I have been interested in is the connection between those kind of talks, romantics in the kind of cultural movement sense, and the notion of romantic love. And I think we see this we can see this kind of dynamic in romantic love, where in a way, if you're too focused on the daily things in your life and you don't have a vision for that connection between the two for the love, then things can kind of fall apart. And that we shouldn't expect for your everyday life to kind of be harmonious with the love that you feel, because it's more like this idea or more like this vision that you stay true to at times and then you fall back from and then you can learn to be true to again. And I think that I see that also in the way that artists often relate to their audience and the way that performers relate to their audience. And I think I've been mainly interested in like romantic love, but I see there's a broader concept of love that comes out in that way. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
It's interesting that you bring that up. In my newest work that's going to premiere in April, there is a section where I'm talking to someone in the audience and we're having a tender moment. So whether I swipe right or left, depending on our conversation, is something that is very, I would say, engaging for an audience. And in that moment, it's spontaneous. I don't know how someone is going to respond. And with this love, it's being vulnerable in that moment. And how do you do that with people that you don't know or a person that you don't know? In this form of expression, when, at least for me, I wasn't taught to express love early on. And my expression of love came through the arts. And it's a beautiful thing that I feel artists get to experience and then also put out for the world.
Yeah, I love it. Should we maybe see what the audience has to say about this? So like if anyone has stories they'd like to share about beauty and art and performance and love and the careening and crashing of those together, anybody brave enough to kind of share something? Or yeah, please.
I think it's a little bit, just a small complementary to what you said. I think in my culture in Kyrgyzstan, we're also not really taught how to express love, be it to another person or mother to son, or especially grandparents to their grandchildren. So I think one of the only ways how it is done in my culture is feeding. So every time I go to my grandma, she overfeeds me. And she, I think, consciously believes that at my age there is no such thing as being fed and full. So I grew to realize that it's probably one of the ways how people express their love. So it's very interesting.
That was wonderful. Yes, please.
I would add to the statement and comment and just say love is, in my estimation, a function of survival. If we just reduce everything to basic needs, we establish our in-groups and we establish affinities based on shared fate and survival, and then we extrapolate, or at least we abstractify the concept of survival to all of the other elements. Once we've got our basic needs met, love becomes that abstraction that ultimately means I'm safe, I can live for another day.
Yeah, yeah, love it. Yeah, please, yeah.
And also, similarly to his culture, even in South Africa, it's the same. So, love for South Africans is all about feeding, making sure you have a roof over your head, everything is fine. Other than that, like, what more do you want? For example, depression does not exist according to my culture. Like, because if you go to your parent and say, I'm depressed, I need love, emotional support, they're gonna be like, what is that? Because you have a roof over your head, you have food, you go to school, you have clothes, so what more do you want? That's love, and that's that. So, yeah.
Do you think that then, like, worrying too much about it is itself a kind of sickness? Is that maybe how you would put it? Like, is there a way we can become a kind of too focused on our own worries about and anxieties about love that we undermine ourselves in some way? Like, here, just I'm feeding you. This is us connecting. This is us being together.
Yeah, I would say that's how it is.
Yeah.
If you have everything you need, like basic needs, what more do you want?
Mm-hmm. I love it. Yeah. And like, what are those moments where you're performing or you're working with students and helping them perform, what are those moments like where you get it and you realize I'm doing it right and I really love myself right now?
And I think it depends on what right means, for each individual. And there's something that you said that really touched home, because if art is only to the degree of how much you love yourself, I would say that I grew up without self-love. However, when I left my home and I entered my school at 9 o'clock in the morning, and I was able to have a music class, then a vocal class, English, history, all those other things, and then a dance class that blew my mind, even though I was always told that I have an atypical body for dance. That's where I fell in love with something. And through that, I started to fall in love with myself. And I would say that truly only started it's been emerging. But now when I feel in love with myself, that started 2 years ago when I turned 40. So as someone that's been training and practicing and performing all of these years, people would say my work is lovely, or they gravitated towards it. However, that my self-love, it took a while in order for me to get there.
Yeah, Roger. Yeah.
Thanks, Liana. I'm wondering if you all, either of you, think about the difference between love and friendship in this way. I mean, love can be something that is deeply, as you said, affirming, and yet tears you away from a world, either with one other person or with yourself. Whereas friendship is a relationship of respect for the person of the other that allows you to interact into a community in some way. And I'm wondering to what extent some of what you're talking about is respect for the other, as opposed to a love which can almost encapsulate the other and destroy them and yourself. And if that distinction is one that means something to you.
Yeah, it's something I've thought about a lot, and I can see both sides. I think to focus on romantic love for a moment, I think one thing you will often hear is something like a good romantic relationship is like a best friend with benefits, right? Like a real close attachment best friend. But the other side, I think, and I think I kind of agree with you here, Roger, that friendship and love might be very, very different. And the difference is in friendship, there's a kind of freedom that you're respecting in the other person. There's a kind of letting the other person be and accepting them as who they are and whatever decisions they make for themselves. And what you get out of friendship is that kind of respect and support, no matter what those kind of decisions have been. Whereas love is based on this kind of attachment and identity. There's a way in which you identify much more closely and become like a kind of larger one with someone when you're in a romantic relationship with them that you're kind of not when you're friends. And there are benefits and drawbacks to that. And one thing that the benefit is, your friends come over for dinner, you love feeding them, you love talking with them, but you don't wake up next to them in the morning and then like brush your teeth together, and you don't then have to worry about how to finance the vacation the next month. And when you're attached to someone and identify with them, those are the kinds of things that you end up working out together. And yeah, so I think they're very different. I see both sides. Sorry, that was a lot.
I'm wondering, as I'm listening to everyone, how much of this is generational? Because I'm thinking about your students, these young people that have "I love you" in their own language, as you were talking about. And then I think about my father, like I do every single day. My father was born in 1917. He's an older dad, right? And so he never said, at least "I love you." Never. The words never came out. But he showed me every day how much he cared about me. He understood me like no one else in this world, living dead or probably yet to be born. But he showed us every day, my sister and brother and I. And so even though the words don't come out, it was very clear the love that he had for us. But now we have several generations later, we have these young people who are talking about love. So I think some of this perhaps is generational.
Yeah. Fully agree. And with our young people, they are so expressive in our school environment in DC, and they're open about their mental health. And they will say to any adult in the building or even to their parent, "You're not listening to me. I'm trying to tell you this is how I feel right now, and I need you to acknowledge that," which is a lot different from when I was growing up and then my father and my ancestors.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's amazing today how open students can be. In ways that, so to speak to the generation, I think like even myself, younger in our age, would not be anything like our students today. Yeah, totally. That's good.
Liana, I'm curious about 2 years ago when you said kind of something shifted for you in the journey of self-love.
Mm-hmm.
I have two questions. Like one, like how has your art, if at all, how has your art changed or shifted since then? Mm-hmm. And what has supported you in that process? Or maybe what was it that kind of, when you turned 40, or what, did something happen?
Yes. I think I'm an all or nothing type of person. So throughout my life, I'm like, I'm going to go on. Someone mentioned a vegan diet or something of that nature. And it's like, I go from one extreme to the other. And I had always been doing that. And there was something about it where I'm like, break the cycle. Even if I don't get exactly what I want, break the cycle of I'm giving up cigarettes, or like I'm going to do yoga every single day because I feel I have to do that in order to thrive. And once I started to stop that cycle, that's when I really began to just sit with myself. And I always thought that I had been sitting with myself. I've lived at ashrams before. I'm like, I know me. However, it's still that pendulum from one end to the other. And my art that I spoke about before was steeped in my trauma. And there was a point where I had a conversation with a well-known artist, Jay Bowie, and we talked about how can we experience joy, Black joy, because for consumers, it comes in a package, at least in the downtown New York performance scene, where it is, here is all of this trauma, and you're looking at my body, and here's what I'm expressing to you. But what about joy? Will an audience still show up if you are doing a joyful piece, or I end up doing a comedy set? In one of my pieces, I sing If You're Happy and You Know It in a gospel version. So all of those things, and that's when the transformation started to happen, and that this other being that was inside of me, where I really, my heart started to open. Someone mentioned the rib cage, and I don't know if you've ever had this bursting moment when you're either driving somewhere or being out in nature. It really started to feel like my heart was fully opening, and there were lots of tears that went along with it, and releasing things from the past, and how am I going to move forward in life from here on out.
Thank you, Liana.
Thank you, Mike.
Thank you, everybody.